Hey everybody, I wanted to give you an update on the Infernalist Orbital cannon build that we've been running. You know, the one where we can, at will, freely proc comets like this. Just make it rain. And yeah, let me just fix up the gem here. But I've made some changes. However, I want you to keep in mind that the changes that I've made, they have to do with this jewel, the Adorned, which goes from 0 to 100% increased effect of jewel socket passive skills containing corrupted magic jewels. This is an insane item, however, it is very much a rare endgame chase item. And it's very expensive. The one that I got was like, I don't know, 70 divs or something. So altogether, with the blue magic jewels that you need to be either corrupting yourself or buying off the market yourself, this build pivot is probably close to 100, 150 divs to put together. I had been purchasing blue jewels for a while in anticipation of this pivot, so it took me a week, maybe a week and a half of accumulating jewels. I corrupted so many. You can see I actually have a bunch stashed right here, extra corrupted jewels that I'm not even using right now. Just options for the future. But in general, why would you want to make this pivot? Given that it kind of just makes it so that you double up 2 affixes instead of having the 4 affixes of a rare jewel. Well, first of all, hitting max stats on 2 affixes is much easier than hitting max stats on 4 affixes. So that is where having blue jewels makes it easier to have higher stats than having yellow jewels. So that's one point. Another use case for the Adorned is that, for example, red jewels, right? So let's say stuff that has life regen and elemental damage. Those are 2 useful affixes, one being prefix, one being a suffix. You don't really get 4 useful affixes in a red jewel for the build that we're running. If you're running a rare ruby jewel, you're only going to be getting maybe 3 affixes worth of value out of them. And so in cases like that, where the ruby or maybe even the green jewels, you can't easily get 4 affixes worth of value from the rare ones. Running a blue jewel can be extremely valuable. So running the Adorned setup. So that's another use case for the Adorned. And then another use case for Adorned is if you have an affix, let's say 50% life regen rate. If you have this affix that you particularly want to stack up, and it's not easily available in the tree, for example, life regen, you can have a bit of here, a bit here because we're low life, a bit here, but really not much else in the tree. So if you want to stack up jewels for life regeneration rate, well, if you're stacking rare jewels, if you have, let's say, 10 jewel slots, the most you can get is 10 times 15 life regen, so that's 150 life regeneration rate bonus. However, if you stack blue jewels with the Adorned, and let's say it's 100% Adorned for simplicity, for easy math, then you can all of a sudden stack 15 times 2, so that's 30. And let's say you're taking up one of your jewel spots with the Adorned, so now you have 9 spots left times 30, so 270% life regen. So you're nearly doubling your life regen max, your cap of how much life regen you can get out of jewels. Obviously, that's a massive investment in just life regen, in just all of your jewels basically being red rubies. So that's just an example. Another use case where if there's a particularly valuable affix that is extremely scarce in your gear and in your passive tree both, but it exists in the jewels. For cases like that, running an Adorned with literally every single jewel slot having that affix, that can be a very high value investment. And then the other benefit of running blue jewels is that once you corrupt them, you can see that +5 dex, that's a corrupted mod. That also benefits from the Adorned, and that also gets doubled up if you have like 100% Adorned. So if I hover just underneath here, you can see jewel socket, it gives me 9 dex, and then 29 life regen elemental damage. So yeah, in our case, the reason why we went with Adorned is just to get more stats out of our jewels. We're pretty much running 15/15s or just max stats jewels all around for all of our jewel slots. One more adjustments that we made to the build is we acquired a Prism of Belief with +3 to level of all combat skills. This is roughly 40% more damage in a single jewel slot. So this is strongly recommended. Get it, make sure to get this one. However, when I bought it, it was 12 divines. It seems to have shot up in price to 40 to 50 divs. So again, this pivot is very much an endgame pivot where once you're using the prior setup that I had showcased with rare jewels and a solid enough the survivability to just run trials, for example, I think this build is phenomenal for trial spamming and farming. But once you do that for a while and you acquire some currency, you can pivot to this setup. So what other adjustments did we make? We put these 3 points here. I think I had them in the last video as well, potentially, but these give us a little bit of extra meta energy, but also per point, this is 3 points for 70 or 68% increased damage. So that's pretty solid. 3 points for 70% damage. If you compare that to a jewel, which you can think of a jewel as like 3 points for a jewel. In most setups, you're pathing through here, for example, you're 3 points away from a jewel. And a jewel is essentially, if you look at this one, for example, 30% elemental damage. Even in the suffix, you could consider getting a damage suffix, which could be something like another 30% damage. So you can think of a jewel as like 60% damage plus some stats, let's say 10 int, 15 int, whatever. Compared to this, it's very close, very comparable. 68% damage for 3 points plus 15% meta energy. So the trade-off, the opportunity cost between these 3 points versus 3 points that give you a jewel is very similar. So I like these 3 points. We also spec'd back into Heavy Frost. I've said so many times I actually love Heavy Frost. If you look at rares with very high cold resistances, without Heavy Frost, they take quite a few comets to take out, multiple volleys of comets. However, with Heavy Frost, one, maybe max 2 volleys of comets, and they're down. Thin Ice is just an extra point away, so this 3-point investment is phenomenal. It also gives us 40% freeze buildup, so all around just a very solid 3-point investment. We still have the crit chance to make it easier to hit our crit cap. And then we actually took out the cast speed here. And so you might ask yourself, why did we do that? Well, we're no longer really spamming Eye of Winter very much. The increased mana cost isn't really necessary. We hit a lot of our stealth damage breakpoints without that. And quite frankly, we have instacast Barrier Invocation. So cast speed doesn't really change that too much. Cast speed, it does help smooth a few things out, like when we're casting Soul Offering, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Or casting Frostbite. Or even Eye of Winter. It helps a little bit. But for Comet and Barrier Invocation, it does nothing. So we decided to get rid of it. And then I also got rid of Storm Charged. And really, Storm Charge is actually a phenomenal point. These 2 Elemental Penetration nodes, I find them to be just incredibly low value. Especially once we get back into Heavy Frost. That is like 100% Elemental Pen. So these 2 are completely overwritten against frozen enemies. Storm Charge in itself, like if you think of it as 3 points for 20% crit chance and 40% elemental damage, well, there are jewels like this one where you can get 3 points for 30% crit chance and 30% spell damage and a little bit of strength or int or res, whatever. So it's kind of comparable, and you also don't get the little bit of extra stats from the pathing nodes. So I kind of think this is inferior to just, and it's mostly just because of the small nodes. If the small nodes provided some value, like 10% spell damage, like if these 10% elemental damage were there, I would probably consider running these 3 points. I'm just highlighting this. This is the kind of thought process I would recommend, is always calculating the opportunity cost of every single point you've invested in the passive tree. Every single point is an opportunity cost versus a different point on the passive tree. Otherwise, we took out the life regen here. And more importantly, I'm testing out what happens if we take this life regen. Point per point, this is some of the best 4 points, some of the highest value 4 points we can get. You get 45% life regen, 1.5% life per second, and 40% life recovery from flasks. For 4 points, that is phenomenal. Considering that for rubies, Like this one, for example, the maximum is 15 life regen rate times 2, so 30 with a 100% adorned. That's just these 2 points, right? Not counting the damage prefix, obviously. But yeah, so point per point, these are amazing. The only issue is you need to path 4 attributes just to get to these 4 points. And you don't really get much value out of it. Like, there's nothing else around here that we would ever want. Everything is specific to attack damage. The only other thing that could be useful is the flasks stuff. But that's just 1 point away. So, I don't know. It's just hard to justify 4 attributes for another 4 points. 8 points. 8 points is easily 2 joules. Defensively, 2 joules is going to be slightly worse. But offensively, 2 joules is going to give you more than this 8-point investment. So if you're struggling with life regen, this is probably the better route to go, is to just go for this 4-node loop. But if you want to get a little bit more DPS out of your build, maybe the joule route is better. I'm still not 100% convinced that I want to spec out of these 4 points, just because they're such high value. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm testing out right now. Other than that, we just, trimmed the tree as much as possible and invested everything in jewels. So I'll quickly hover over all of my blue jewels. So you can see here we have maxed out, and even the 10 int, by the way, is the max roll. So this is max elemental, max life regen, max int. This is a phenomenal jewel. We corrupted it ourselves, so we got lucky there. Here's another good one, 8 int. And this is a max roll, 8 dex for flask effect duration. So 30% flask effect duration, I think is quite nice. 1 jewel like that I'm running. No more than that, I would say. So Prism of Belief spawns 1 to 3 comets. And here's another with meta energy. I think I'm running 2 or 3 meta energy jewels. Crit damage energy shield with some int. Crit damage energy shield with tiny bit of chaos res. Life regen elemental damage. I need to replace this one with something that has a stat on it. Crit chance, spell damage, and strength. Spell damage energy shield, 7 strength. Crit chance, spell damage, and 7 lightning res. Meta energy, cold damage, and 8 dex. And then meta energy, cold damage, and 5 strength. So those are the jewels that I'm running. So you'll notice 3 meta energy jewels. That's kind of the amount that I need. And so let's just quickly go over my stats right now. I'm up to 373 strength. Int and dex, I have just enough to cover my gem requirements. And by the way, I switched to, for dexterity 134, I'm running that high for alchemist boon. So I switched for this so that I can have 0.25 flask charges per second, together with my 0.25 on my flask itself. That's half a charge per second. So every 20 seconds, I get a free chug. Maybe not even 20 seconds, because I am running Coward's Legacy 15 reduced flask charges used. So it does give us an option, even for those drawn out fights, to regen our flasks. And then you can see that we're running about 5.7 thousand life plus energy shield. And given how high that is, we just don't need as much meta energy. So the higher the ES life sum, I think you remembered I posted the formula in the Mobilytics website, but the higher that sum is, the less we need this energy gain modifier to be. So that's one thing to note. However, the other thing I want to mention is I was actually running like 2.3, 2.5k energy shield roughly at some point. And I found it to be too much. If your ratio of life to energy shield is skewing too much to the energy shield side, you run the risk of running into a chaos damage mob, which chaos damage does more and does double damage versus energy shield. And so that mob can just blow out, completely blow up your energy shield. And then you click your comet and that just takes 30% of energy shield ES total, which goes directly out of life. And you run the risk of just killing yourself with the Infernal Flame self-damage. And that is a real issue as you increase energy shield. I found it to actually be very cumbersome. Not only that, the more you increase energy shield, the more self-damage you're going to take. And so the more life recovery you need in order to compensate for that additional self-damage. If you boost life, on the other hand, because of the fact that we're running the shield with regenerate life as a percentage of your life total, getting max life gives you more regen. So even though we take more self-damage, we also get more regen, and the two offset each other. But getting energy shield does not give you more regeneration in any way whatsoever. So you have to find other ways to supplement that additional energy shield. So that's something to keep in mind, is you actually don't want crazy high values of energy shield, which can be a bit of a downside for the build, obviously, as you know, running a lot of self-damage can get a little troublesome. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's something that I noticed as I was playing around with the build. I don't know if I can give you a perfect formula to tell you exactly what ratio you should be running. Roughly speaking, probably something like 65-35 I think is reasonable. Something around that area. If you run 60-40, for example, that can get problematic. 55-45, even more so. Just find the right balance for your current stat line in terms of life recovery and all the other stats that you have. You just have to play around with the build. But given these life totals, you can see we are actually running 250 spirit. We're getting 150 spirit from beta as well. So that opens up the spirit that we needed to run another little pivot in a single skeleton warrior, so 20 spirit, together with soul offering, which gives us 40% more damage. It's quite substantial, and I think, yeah, it's even more here. So this is a great boss killing little trick. It doesn't last very long, it's like 5 seconds, but 50% more damage for 5 seconds. That can be quite a bit for the comets that we spam. I would recommend spamming potions at the same time as well. And so we're running soul offering with ablation, font of blood, and minion mastery. Font of blood is another 2% life regen, so that's quite nice. And for skeletal warrior, we have meat shield for a little bit of tankiness, as well as last gasp. Last gasp is really good for when they die. You have a little bit less of a downtime where they're gone. For barrier invocation, you'll notice we're not actually running the 50% or 40% increased energy gain modifier. Instead, we're running cold masteries for just an extra level of combat. It's not amazing. It's like 12-13% more damage perhaps, but it's just not many other options that are there. Concentrated effect is something that I tried, running concentrated effect and magnified effect at the same time. However, that felt awkward for clear. Like, concentrated effect is just best in slot for boss kills, but for clear, it's awful. You don't want it. Enemies just die anyway. You don't need the extra damage. You want the extra area of effect. So that's something to consider, is just running cold mastery. Unfortunately, I wish there were a few more damage support gems that we could run. There aren't too many options. But yeah, cold mastery is okay. You can see my current average damage per use says 125k. Now it's down to 116k. I was just checking if there's some sort of buff that I have active or something. But yeah, 116k. And if you pop soul offering, 173k. Pretty solid. It can get amped up even more with frostbite on the switch. The crit damage bonus is actually quite a bit lower than I was running previously. I had to switch some of the jewels to life regen jewels to compensate for the fact that we are not running this wheel right here. However, we should be getting, instead of all that crit damage bonus, we should be getting a lot of extra elemental damage. We're also running extra crit hit chance. I got a better wand. This one's up to 99% crit hit chance. And because of that, we're at 62. I would like to lower my crit chance somewhere. Unfortunately, I cannot drop an entire crit chance jewel. That drops it way more than I'd like. So we're just looking for some small minor adjustments to make that would balance this out. So those are the main adjustments that we made to the build so far. Just primarily Adorned, Prism of Belief, and then switching our jewel setup into an Adorned setup. I'm still in the process of selling my old rare jewels to get some of the Divines back. But overall, I found value in this switch. The Adorned is always such a powerful late game switch for any build that runs a lot of jewels. You kind of always want to be aiming towards an Adorned if your build is running many jewels. We even have another jewel socket that is 3 points away. Something to consider. Or we could think about going into these crit damage, crit chance nodes. This build itself is approaching almost complete min-max. It performs really well. I've done a lot of the content in the game. I haven't done all the citadels just because it's been a nightmare to spawn them. I kind of gave up on them. I found it not very valuable to be just searching for citadels for hours, and then, you know, we spent one full stream, like 5 hours, not finding a single citadel and actively looking for them. So essentially scuffing our loot, scuffing our farming rate, because we're running tier 14 maps and not like tier 15 optimized juiced maps. And so 5 hours kind of wasted, or just low value time, low XP as well. And overall, because of that experience, I decided to just not worry about citadels until maybe there's a patch and they make them a little bit easier to source. And it kind of looks like until then, we're not going to be running the Arbiter of Ash or whatever it's called. So altogether, I'm taking a bit of a break from mapping and just focusing on farming divines in either Trial of Chaos or Trial of Sekima. So that's what I'm running nowadays. I'll probably do a little bit of mapping here and there as well. That is my update for today. Let me know if you have any questions. And if you're curious about our progression, tune in on Twitch or YouTube. I stream on both. And also, happy holidays, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic time welcoming the new year, enjoying some gaming in between visiting with family and friends, and just loving life. Take it easy, everybody. Much love and good tschüss. Samma nästa.